I'm curious for you if it was allowing yourself to be angry and express your anger, even if just on the page and not to him, was what opened a window for you to see compassion versus sort of stuffing down the anger and trying to skip over to compassion. Does that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that was part of the process. And because when he died, his sisters kept saying to me, "Oh, he loved you so much. He was so proud of you and your brother. Be grateful for the happy memories. Think back on all the good times." And there was a moment, and this made its way into a poem from a therapy experience where I said something about, I remember the therapist asking me for a good memory of my dad, and I couldn't find one, not even one crushed petal to pick up and offer her. And it was like in those early months, I really couldn't. I had no access to the good times. And I was so angry that was all people had to offer me. Like he was this amazing, perfect father when he wasn't. So I really do think I needed to be angry and move through that anger to be able to get to someplace a little softer.
Hello, my grieving friend. It's Lisa. Whether you're a longtime listener or you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. I'm so glad you're here. By now, you likely know I'm passionate about exploring the nature of grief. As a narrative therapy trained social worker, a grief activist, and a widow, I'm dedicated to helping us learn to be in relationship with our grief instead of running from it. In our modern culture, we've pushed grieving into the shadows, something to be experienced privately, causing us to suffer unnecessarily and in isolation. Grief is our human inheritance. It offers us medicine if we tend to it as a community. So together with my extraordinary guests, and this season answering your questions too, we're changing the narratives of grief, one conversation at a time. I am so delighted to share the extraordinarily tender and magical conversation I just had with the warm and wise Naila Francis. If you don't know her, she's a certified grief coach and death midwife, an ordained interfaith minister, a poet, an accomplished writer. As the founder of This Hallowed Wilderness, Naila helps people transform their relationship to grief and loss through one-on-one coaching, workshops, presentations, rituals, and one of my favorite things, community grief tending. Now, we've had the pleasure of being in conversation a few years ago on another podcast. And in our own way, we're in conversation with each other's work online all the time. Today's episode moved me in a way that surprised me as we explored our shared interest in centering aliveness in a world full of loss, the power of nature as a container for our grief, the way writing, poetry, really many forms of creativity allows us to metabolize and move our grief. We touched on themes of loss when the relationship was complicated, how new loss opens us back up to the teachings still yet to be learned from old grief, and, well, so much more. Naila's heart, her energy, her words, and her wisdom are such a gift, and I can't wait for you to meet her. Welcome, my friends, to another beautiful episode of Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast, this time with my friend Naila Francis, who's I've lucky enough to been in her orbit, have her in my orbit for many years now, but this is really the first time she's coming onto my show. I had the privilege of being in conversation with her, I think last year. But anyhow, welcome, Naila, to Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. So happy to have you here.
Oh my gosh, I am delighted to be here after circling each other's orbits, and our conversation last year or 2
Yeah.
years ago. Who knows what is time?
I know. What is time? This is listeners, I'm sorry, we're not gonna solve that age-old dilemma today, but we might get into some conversations about the relationship between time and grief, that's for sure. However, transitioning from the sort of the hilarious and the light and the existential to, grounding us in the conversation that I have been having with guests for 7 seasons now, trying to tackle, I think, a mission that both of us share really, which is to unpack the harmful grief beliefs that are getting in our way at the individual level for our own personal lived experience with grief, but are also impacting us collectively. And boy, aren't we experiencing a lot of that right now. So if I asked you the question to think about an early memory of a loss in your childhood, could be a death loss or not, an early loss that comes to mind, and how are the adults in your life modeling explicitly, implicitly, what grief should or shouldn't look like? What comes to mind, a loss, and what you were learning back then?
Yeah, it's so interesting because, of course, I know that you ask this question.
Yes.
And so there was a part of me that was expecting this one memory around losing one of our dogs when I was about 8 or 9 to be the
Yeah.
one that surfaced. But what's feeling more alive for me in this moment is actually something that happened when I was about 17 or 18. And my parents went through a very nasty separation, ultimately leading to divorce, but just it was really, really painful and brutal at times. And there was a moment where my mom moved out of the house to get her own place. And my dad and I drove her over there to settle in. My dad very much did not want the relationship to be over. For my
Mm,
mom, it was. And I understood why eventually. But I just remember this moment, like my mom being very stoic. Here she
yeah,
is, leaving her marriage, walking away from her kids because it was just sort of implied that my brother and I would be with my dad. There was no even conversation around that, like, what's going to happen? And it was right before
yeah,
I went to college. And she was just so sort of detached throughout the whole thing.
mm,
And I can remember her standing on the balcony of her apartment, her new apartment that we just dropped her off at, sort of waving goodbye. And my dad standing beside me, clearly very upset. And I am gutted
yeah,
inside, but have no way to even express or articulate that. And no one ever talked about that moment.
mm,
Like, no, my mom never said, like, how was that for you? I'm so sorry. That must have been hard. Or this is what it was like for me to move in on the first day and know that you weren't coming with me. My dad was beside himself, but honestly, throughout their separation and divorce, I did a lot more caretaking of my dad than he did of me because he was so
yeah,
upset.
yeah.
And that's just such a raw moment in my life that just got no
Wow.
acknowledgement
Yeah, yeah,
whatsoever. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Wow, Nyla, I just had this sort of image of you standing next to your dad and watching your mom, and I so appreciate that you were willing to pivot to share that story, and even just what you named, which was, "This memory feels so alive," and I wanna just sort of turn towards our listeners as, like,
Yeah.
sometimes we have these impulses or these instincts or these memories that come up, and we shut them down because they're maybe not what we think we're supposed to be thinking about or talking about. So even just, like, as a way of modeling for us just now, I so appreciate you bringing that up and also naming the grief that comes in the ends of relationships and the unattended to grief of the children when the grown-ups are either whether they're happy or sad, and I don't wanna use those words too cliché, like your mom wasn't just happy and your dad wasn't just
Right.
sad, I know it was complex, but so wrapped up in their own, experience that there was no space for your grief. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or to even name it grief. I imagine that
Right.
wasn't even something that was named. Yeah.
No, I always think, I try to think when was actually the first time I ever heard the word grief, because I
Yeah.
swear I probably never heard it until my 20s.
Yeah.
No one ever talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think divorce and its impact on children, which can ripple into so many other spheres of our lives for so
Yeah.
long, is just not one of those griefs that's really given a
Yeah.
lot of attention to.
Yeah. Um, I don't wanna make about me, and I name my mom left my dad when I was 17, so I really and there
Mm.
was a lot of similar, like, one person wanted it, one person didn't, um, also being the sort of caretaker of people's emotions and trying to follow the leads of different people's needs, sort of, putting our own at the back burner, so, um, to name even, what do you think later on in life when you faced maybe a death loss or some other loss, can you name a time when you began to recognize this moment too as grief? Because that happens so often. New losses help us sort of
Yeah.
recognize old grief, especially unprocessed grief.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of an opening and then I shut down when I was in college, cuz there were moments where I just thought, I thought I should be happy. I was in
Yeah,
college, I was having all these new experiences, making new friends, and there was just this undercurrent. I don't even know if I would call it sadness, because I couldn't really put a name to it, but something that just felt off for me
yeah,
and very unsettling. And sometimes I would cry in moments that I didn't expect to cry. And then, of course, just brush it off because
yeah,
no one in my family really displayed their emotions that way. And so I remember at one point thinking, well, maybe I should go see the school counselor,
yeah.
which was a very brave thing to do because also no one in
Yes.
my family went to therapy or talked about therapy.
Yeah, yeah.
um, and I went, and I wish I could remember what she even said to me. It must have been within 5, 10 minutes of me sitting down across for her. She said something, and I just cried and cried and the entire session. And I was
Mm.
so mortified that I never went back.
Mm. Oh, again, I'm holding,
Yeah.
like, young Nyla in my heart, like, what a vulnerable moment, and it just, again, speaks so much to the how important it is that we model getting help, that we model having big feelings, that emotions are okay and valid and actually necessary to metabolize. I know we share that language too, because if you had had that in the backdrop of your life, which many of us, I won't say most of us, but many of us also, I mean, I grew up in a family where those emotions were not modeled either. We think instead of this is normal, this is natural, this is what I need to express, we think, oh, how mortifying, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
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 So just like holding such tenderness for that version of you. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of compassion for her too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, to go back to your question, what really then sort of cracked open the grief of my parents' marriage falling apart was the end of a romantic relationship when I was
Mhm.
in my 20s. And um, which ended in a really devastating, painful way. Betrayal, loss of a friendship. Like it was a very, I always was like, am I in a soap opera? These things don't happen to people like me. Like, what is this really my life right now? But that experience was so deeply painful and also enlivening in the sense that it opened me up to a lot that I hadn't looked at.
Yeah.
All the grief of that,
Yeah.
those years of watching my parents' marriage crumble, watching my mom leave, watching my dad go back to St. Lucia, which is where we're from, but we
Mhm.
lived in the
Yeah.
US. All of that came back in a way where I was able to be like, oh, this is really something here that needs tending.
Yeah. It's always so surprising to folks, and I will put myself even in this camp in the past, and even doing what I do for a living, it still catches me off guard, AKA grief is a sneaky bitch. But is the way that new losses either crack open losses or grief that we've never recognized, or can even for those that we have maybe spent time with and metabolized a little, it can help us see or parts of our former grief that needs tending to again. And it surprises me, even as many losses have I experienced and the work that I do. I'm curious if that's the same for you. It's just always I'm still somehow caught off guard about, and I would like to call it an invitation. At the moment, it feels painful, but I would say it's an invitation to tend to a part of your story, a part of your grief that hasn't been tended to. Have you experienced that with each? Because I know we're going to talk today. In the last 6 years, you've
Yeah.
experienced a lot of back to back losses, but that notion that new losses open windows to old, does that feel resonant to you?
A- Absolutely. That feels so resonant. Like I feel like there's sort of the primary loss. Like I always think of my dad dying being my
Yeah.
primary loss, but then there are all these sort of spokes that spin out from that to
Yeah.
other losses. And then since then, there have been losses where something else comes through that window, and I'm like, oh, I thought I had dealt with that, or oh, who knew that
Yeah.
was even there? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always I had fellow poet, 'cause you're a poet too, Rosemary Watola Tromer
I
on the
love her.
show. I know, I love
Yeah.
her too
Yeah. Yeah.
recently. And she, like me, and I think you too, speak in the language of invitations, or she used the term, when those secondary losses or the waves of grief happen, or, new grief opens the door to old grief. Like, what is the teacher? She uses that sort of language
Hmm.
of like, what is the teacher of this moment? And um, there's so many places I want to go, but just I'm curious how you think about, um, especially you've experienced quite a lot of, I would say, compounding losses over recent years. What you've allowed yourself to see as a teacher in your grief or in your loss in these recent
Hmm.
years.
Yeah, I really appreciate that language because I often think of grief as a teacher or a
Yeah,
guide. Um, and I think one of the biggest things for me is that grief has really taught me about, sort of circling back to the beginning, grief has really taught me about aliveness. I
yeah,
don't know that I knew what true aliveness was until grief came into my life in such a big, insistent, you can't look away. You can try to run or shut me down,
yeah,
but I am here. So let's do this thing.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't think I really knew what it meant to be truly alive. And I think that's a hard concept sometimes for grievers to get because it
yeah,
sounds like a perpetual sort of bliss or happiness or just, like
yeah.
that this a sweet full energy, and it's really the
Uh-uh.
aliveness of, oh, I have access to all of these feelings, and
Yeah.
how incredible that I get to feel them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of toxic positivity, though I think culturally we try to package it that way. Yeah, you of I love that you brought up this concept of aliveness, and I'm so curious to go there, and even maybe how the poet in you or the interfaith minister in you thinks about aliveness. I gave a talk a few years ago at Endwell called Centering
Mhm.
Aliveness in a World Full of Loss, um, which is sort of the nature of my focus of my work right now. And much to what you were saying there, it's not the either or, it's actually our invitation to tend to it all, right? That we
Yeah.
don't get to have our
Yeah.
emotions a la carte, though we would like
Right.
to. I wish we could. But it's actually the grittiness of being present to the despair or to the sorrow or to the rage so that we have the capacity to be present to the delight and wonder. And we have to be present to that wonder in
Yes.
order to do that dance. I think, that Jack Gilbert line I used in my talk, we must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this
I
world.
l- love that
Yeah.
poem. Yes.
Yeah, for the
Yes.
defense, I think it's called, yeah, which feels very resonant, of
Yeah.
course, collectively at this time, but also personally. But when you think about aliveness from the lens of poet, I'm gonna from you hold so many identities, as we all do, but you hold so many really powerful identities in my estimation anyways. There's the poet in you, there's the interfaith minister, I believe in you, there's the sort of community and land steward, in you. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with aliveness in communities, with individuals, even just personally, how you spend time with that idea?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love so much of what you just said. I think aliveness shows up a lot of times for me in the way I engage with nature.
Yeah,
I am just gobsmacked so many times when I'm
yeah,
out and about by the beauty of a sunset or the way the trees' branches look against the twilight sky or a certain bird
yeah,
that appears or a flower I didn't expect to see. And also just by everyday interactions, those ones that we might take for granted, like at the supermarket or the gas station or whatever, those little
yeah,
moments we have with people. They just fill me with so much joy. And I just think there's something about experiencing loss for me and learning to be with my grief that really heightened the preciousness of life and the
yeah,
brevity of life. And I don't ever think it was like a conscious decision to, I'm
yeah,
going to turn on my aliveness now.
yeah,
It just kind of happened that, over time, as the harder edges of grief start to soften and I feel a little more available to the world, I just
yeah,
start falling more and more in love with the world.
yeah,
There's so much beauty, which feels like a challenging thing to say in this moment. And there
yeah,
is so much beauty and wonder and marvel and magic all around us.
yeah.
And so I get to have that. And when I'm really, really angry, I get to have that too. And when I'm
Yes.
really, really sad, I also get to have that. Like none of it cancels each other out.
Yeah. Nyla, I so appreciate the way that you helped name the again, the teacher or the opportunity, I don't wanna use the word gift, I think it's overused a little, of when you face a profound loss and you're moving in some way past the very early hard edges, and I'm not gonna put a timeline on that because I it's different for each of us with each loss, and so that you're out of the shock and you're back into the world, whatever that looks like for you, listener, for each of us, is the opportunity or the teacher is there to revel in the preciousness of life, to be present to wonder, to be in awe of the moral beauty in the world or the natural beauty in the world or the collective effervescence of a gathering. And I always say having hard things happen to you doesn't just make those things come to you. To your point, wasn't like you made a conscious decision. And we tend, I think, this is my experience, to, you know, we look for the negative. We have a little bit of a negativity bias. So I think it does take a kind of musculature or a practice of putting yourself in the way of beauty, I think, as Cheryl Strayed has said, or others.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious if you think your experiences, I think poetry, for example, is one way that really allows me to really practice the muscle of being alive and centering aliveness, of the both and of that I can hold in a poem, I can explore in a poem the darkness and the depravity and the beauty and the wonder in a way that a straightforward conversation couldn't. Were you a poet before your loss? Do you think loss led you to use poetry as a vehicle to make sense of or transform? How do you think about your relationship as poet and griever and someone who
Yeah.
centers aliveness too?
Yeah. I think so. I was a poet before my loss. I will say I don't know that I was as good of a poet
Yeah.
before my
Yeah.
loss. And I don't say that in like a self congratulatory kind of way or
Yeah.
anything. I just think loss gave me a whole new landscape to play with in
Yeah.
my poetry in terms of bringing in some of that aliveness in the way that I see the world, in the way that I feel when I'm in nature. I could bring more of that into my poetry, but then it was also a place for me to speak to hard and challenging
Yeah.
things. I have a friend who often says to me, your grief finds a way into all of your poetry, even if you think it's not there. And she
Yeah.
doesn't mean that in a negative way, but she's
No.
like, there's just always some thread of it that
Yeah.
seems to be there. And I do think it's part of me in a way that I can't separate from, because
Yeah.
often when I'm so immersed in beauty, then that creates more space for me to also be present to, like, well, what's really hard about this moment too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that so much, and because grief is in everything. Grief is a part of our experience in this world, and one of the many things that I so appreciate about all the different avenues of your work, again, from community and land ritual tending to poet to, grief worker, is that you are able to, with your words, with your actions, with your energy, allow us to soften into grief and to allow grief into, like, the community of things that this is a part of our life. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
name that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more of this beautiful conversation. More than ever, my friends, I'm passionate about creating meaningful community and offering you more insight into my work and even into my life, too. I want a place to explore topics in depth, expand my creative expressions through things like long form essays and even maybe some audio and video guided practices. I want to be able to share some behind the scenes moments from the podcast and maybe even eventually host a Dear Lisa column. Most importantly, I want to build an authentic, interactive community off social media. Life is happening so fast, and I want a place where we can slow down, dive deeper, and figure out how to metabolize it all together. And I'd love to have you join me. That's why I launched my Substack, AFGO with Lisa Keefauver. Now, if you haven't heard me talk about it in my book or from the stage, or maybe even here on the podcast, AFGO stands for Another Fucking Growth Opportunity. Yes, of course, I had to get in a judicious use of cussing. Rest assured, my friends, like in all my work, I'll show up authentically, offer thoughtful, meaningful, and practical guidance on how to center aliveness in a world full of loss. I really look forward to your comments, our chats, creating special audio and video content for you, and more. And if you'd like things delivered to your inbox, don't worry, AFGO with Lisa Keefauver will come directly to you. You can sign up after today's episode at afgowithlisakefauver.substack.com. You can find it in the show notes, or if that's all too much, just head to my website, lisakeefauver.com.
And you know, one of the most transformative things I did fairly early on after my dad died was I took a writing class with a poet, and she had lost her daughter. And so all of us in this class were grieving something. And it was just such a different kind of space. Like I'd done therapy and I was
Yeah,
working with an energy worker and other things, but it was like the permission to bring to the page my love for my dad, my anger at my dad, the moments that I was still kind of like wrestling with, like, what did this even mean? To have space to bring all of that to the page was so freeing and sort of like soothing to me in a way
yeah,
that I didn't have to censor myself, that I could be real, and that here was this very generous and wise and gentle teacher making room for all of it.
yeah. I so love the, I mean, listeners know because I have poets on and I write poetry. And just because as a narrative therapy trained social worker, I've, all longed for words. I think there's something about, again, the what you're just named there was this particular class you took was with a poet who was they were very intentionally present about their grief too. So we've all taken classes from people who've experienced loss and we wouldn't know it because they haven't allowed it to inform the spaces that they create or the work that they do. So there's just something really particular and unique about what we're allowed to do and how we can allow words to transform what is. I think Rosemary said this on the air. I don't remember if she did or if it's just one of our off air conversations, but to focus on writing, if you're listening and thinking, I'm not a poet or I'm not a writer, is about these writing spaces allow you to put down what is true in that moment, not what is good.
Absolutely. That is actually one of my favorite writing prompts, whether I'm teaching a class or working
Yeah.
one on one with someone, that I give over and over again is just the
Yeah.
truth is. And I'm like, and
Yeah.
just go from there. The truth is
Yeah.
whatever wants to be revealed in this moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you think of a time when since I get to talk to you as someone who is both a griever and somebody who works with people in grief and writing and supporting grievers, an example, I mean, you don't have to get into details, but maybe even you just mentioned briefly, and if you want to bring your dad's name into the room, you're welcome to as well. But you talked about writing as a way to put the truth and truth. We're not saying with a capital T, it's truth with a lowercase t, right? It's the truth in this moment. It's the unfiltered reality of your experiences now, but something about your dad that you were able to put down on the page, the truth, the complex truth of maybe the hard
Yeah.
feelings you have or the regret and the something you wanna share that might
Yeah.
help us
Yeah.
understand? Yeah.
So my dad's name is Elliot. Thank you for that
Yeah, of
invitation.
course. Yeah.
And we had a very challenging relationship. I loved him
Yeah.
dearly. I knew he loved me dearly, and it was very challenging and strained at times. And, there was a lot that he was, I will say, at fault for. Um, in the demise of my parents' marriage that he never owned up to, that I
Mm,
sort of kept waiting and waiting for this moment, and it
yeah.
never happened. And one of the things that writing poetry allowed me to do, which I didn't really expect, was to have compassion for the child in him that
Mm,
never got the love that he was craving, that never got to be who he maybe knew himself to be. And so, how did he grow up without models of how to be in relationship and how to like nurture, really nurture your children and make space for their gifts and just be present
mm.
in a family life? Um, and so that really brought a lot of tenderness to how I think about him now because for a long time, quite honestly, after he died, I was just very angry.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
love the sort of what came to mind is a sort of window, like this metaphor of a window into his story through your writing.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if this is true. I don't want to make a presumption, but you just named that in the beginning there was a lot of anger. And I think sometimes we try to push down our anger and get to compassion. Culturally, we try to push people towards forgiveness. I'm curious for you if it was allowing yourself to be angry and express your anger, even if just on the page and not to him, was what opened a window for you to see compassion versus sort of stuffing down the anger and trying to skip over to compassion. Does that
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
absolutely think that that was part of the process. And because when he died, his sisters kept saying to me, "Oh, he loved you so much. He was so proud of you and your brother. Be grateful for the happy memories. Think back on all the good times." And there was a
Yeah.
moment, and I actually this made its way into a poem from a therapy experience where I said
Mm.
something about I remember the therapist asking me for a good memory of my dad, and I couldn't find one, not even one crushed petal to pick up and offer her. And it was like in those early months,
Yeah.
I really couldn't. I had no access to the good times,
Yeah.
and I was so angry that that was all people had to offer me, like he was this amazing, perfect
Yeah.
father when he wasn't. So I
Like,
do
that's
think
not my
I
lived
needed to.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I really do think I needed to be angry and move through that anger to be able to get to some place a little softer.
That's really beautiful. I mean, that really speaks to that theme of aliveness that we were talking about too, is that I feel that was just such a perfectly modeled example. And believe me, listeners, I do not like anger, though I have a lot of it right now. And that's one of the emotions I'm still learning at 54 how to process and metabolize and where do I express it. And we just don't get to have one feelings without the other. And the more we can learn to allow them to move, express, digest, metabolize, the I don't wanna say more quickly, but the easier it will be to come to a place maybe of compassion, which I'm curious for you, for folks listening who might have had someone in their life died that they also had a complicated relationship with, even though maybe you came to a moment of having some compassion, seeing the little boy in him, what he didn't get, might you also still have moments where you're mad at him still and then have compassion? This isn't necessarily a linear, I've gotten all the way
Yes.
to compassion and it's a, ooh la la kind of zen moment. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the both and?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are definitely still moments.
Yeah,
Yeah, where sometimes I'll catch myself doing something or thinking something or longing for something. And I think, I wouldn't be like this if you
yeah,
had if you had just showed up for me in a different way. I wouldn't
yeah,
be making this choice if I had had something else modeled for me. And
yeah,
I will share, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I have gone to mediums to
yeah,
talk about losing my dad, and he has come through and
yeah,
apologized for not being there for me as he should have, and
yeah,
and and he said, I'm so sad. It makes me so sad that you have to carry this wound, that I know that I wounded you, and that's something you have to carry for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I think that helps me hold compassion too. And it's also, like you were saying, there's still these moments where I'm deeply sad that I will never get the father I always wanted to get.
Yeah.
And I'll never have
Yeah.
the chance to repair that relationship like I thought we may have. Like that rupture
Yeah.
sort of still exists. Even though I
Yeah.
feel so much love from him on the other side. And, I have all these practices of engaging with him and tending to our relationship. It's still like in this lifetime, we didn't get
Yeah.
to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's an aspect of grief too. I think so often people are confused when they find themselves deeply grieving the death of someone or the end of a relationship that they want, that they had a complicated relationship with or they didn't feel was a positive influence. And then why am I grieving? And I think what you just touched on there is often what we're grieving is the relationship we didn't have or the missed opportunity at a kind of repair too.
Yeah.
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 Sometimes that feels bigger to me, honestly, than the loss of my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so does that feel like an ongoing then that's part of your own grief practice is to tend to those aspects of your grief too?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Um, thank you for sharing a little bit about your dad and just also
Of
about the
course.
the truth of the both and the complexity that happens when we are grieving a relationship that, was maybe messy or had more complexity than other. I mean, all relationships have complexity, but some more than others for sure. Um, I want to come back around to our mutual love of nature. Um, Listeners know beauty walks have been a part of my practice for wow, more than a decade or more.
Mm.
Since the death of my husband Eric, and I integrated into my own grief and my work with others too. But I know from again watching your work through the digital world. This is the one place I love that we have this digital world where we get to track other people since I'm in California and you're in Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
Is is you
Yes.
do a lot of work with connecting with ancestors, with ritual, with land, community gatherings, and I think this is the desperately lost art of modern Western frankly, white culture is that we've lost these grounding sacred spaces and practices that allow us to metabolize grief in any direction you want to talk about what got you into that what is an example of something you're doing currently either in your community with individual grievers or around collective grief why might if we don't feel connected to us listeners myself whoever's listening why might we want to reach out and find ways to be in community, to be with land, to connect with ancestors. What have you learned about what that allows us to
Yeah.
do and be with our grief?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for that question. Such a great question. And I think, honestly, in some ways for me, it's been a remembering
Yeah.
coming to incorporate all of this into my work because, you know, I can say that um, I did a shamanic apprenticeship a few years ago that was really based in a land honoring practice.
Okay.
And other things that I have done to sort of cultivate that. But when I think about my connection to the land, I mean, I grew up in the Caribbean. Um,
Yeah.
It was the ocean was like my first
Yeah.
true home, honestly. My mom would go to the beach when she was pregnant with me. And I remember her saying relatives would be like, "Oh my God, don't go in the water. It's not safe. You're pregnant." And she would go in anyway. And I just
Yeah.
love this image of here I am swimming in my mom's belly, but also in the
Yes.
ocean. And my mom's dad was a farmer And
Okay.
so one of my favorite memories as a child was the mornings he would pile all his grandkids into the back of his pickup truck and drive us out to the farm to be with him. So there was
Yeah.
always that connection
Mm,
there. And I know that you're going to Peru on your retreat,
I
which
know.
sounds amazing.
I
But
know.
real
Come with
yeah.
me. Come. Come, everyone. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
everyone, come. Um, I remember years ago, it's been, gosh, it's been more than 10 years. I first went to Peru and just putting my hands on the stones there and
Yeah.
feeling how ancient they were. And like, wow, what have these stones seen? What might they have
Yeah.
to teach us? And then hiking a mountain at Machu Picchu when I was not somebody who hiked mountains and feeling so held by that mountain and a butterfly landing on my finger and feeling like, oh, this butterfly has something to tell me about this moment. And so I think all the work that I do really is a remembering. And I know we're
Yeah.
both fans of Francis Weller's
Yeah.
work. And he often talks about letting things move through you through the dreaming earth.
Yeah.
So, what are the ideas that the earth wants to speak to you, to dream through you about ritual
Yeah.
and reconnecting to the land and honoring that we all are part of the earth? And I think one of the reasons it's so valuable for me to keep bringing that into what I do, even if it's a guided meditation that just allows you a moment to connect to something you love in nature, is because I think one of the griefs in this culture that maybe we don't talk about a lot is just our disconnection from nature and
Yeah.
not remembering that we are nature, we are
Yeah.
the earth, that she lives in us. And so to find ways to honor her and to connect with her and to bring her into rituals, to me, that's some of the deepest, most profound healing that we can
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I could listen to you talk about that all day long. You guys, s one of the things that you named there, I think is well, first of all, I love the visual of you swimming in your mom's belly and your mom swimming in the ocean, and also I'm a lifelong scuba diver, and the ocean is also my
Right? Yeah.
sacred place, so I loved that visual. But the word that's really, alive in my imagination w is the remembering,
Mm.
and I think you are so spot on when you think about one of the profound griefs of this time of being alive is the amnesia of the forgetting that we are nature, that we are not separate from nature, that nature is our teacher, um, in its hibernation cycles, in its, death, growth, laying fields laying fallow and coming back to life, all of the things that are a teacher. And for those of us who grew up in cities or in urban areas or didn't, go to farms, I think it can feel sometimes so far off and so distant from us. Like it's a foreign idea. And I love that I hear you saying in the practices that you're inhabiting with yourself, but then the people that you serve and work with is that we all know. We know in the stardust of our bodies, we know in the lineage of our ancestors. There's a knowledge there. There's old knowing
Yeah.
that yes, we can reach for and read and follow your work and read Francis Weller's work, indigenous practices and thinkers who have been knowing this for millennia. And there are ways that we can walk outside our door and put our hand on a tree and listen, whatever the tree is, and listen to what it has to say. And that there's a part of us. And if you've ever been in any kind of nature, which I'm assuming everybody listening has, if you slow down and quiet enough, that there's a kind of grounding wisdom that nature has for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also
Yeah.
feel like nature wants to receive us. Like to me, there's this perception of joy or like, oh, finally, or welcome, something that happens when
Yeah.
you're very intentionally engaging from a place of deep reverence and appreciation that, when I have this relationship with the spruce in my courtyard, and I swear sometimes I'll just stand outside with my coffee in the morning and just say, hello, spruce. And I
Yes.
do feel like a wave of delight, like some kind of acknowledgement, like, oh, you came to greet me this morning.
Yeah. I knew we had a lot in common, but this conversation is deepening it too. I happen to now live in Southern California, and I'm lucky enough to have a palm tree in my little, 5
Hmm.
square inches of my yard, out front, and I say good morning to the palm tree almost every day, and I can tell you, I have been in conversation with her so many days, and actually, when there were weeks and months when I couldn't leave basically the perimeter of my house while I was going through chemo and radiation in these last few years, I mean, except when I left to go to the hospital, um, that palm tree, the morning glories, the butterflies, the hummingbirds that visited the little, you know, I guess it's more like 20 square feet of my yard, were my companions, and they, um, saw me and welcomed me, and
Hmm. I love that.
yeah, so I just so appreciate the way you are modeling for the rest of us, you know, sometimes simple, sometimes more elaborate practices of being with nature. Can you share a little bit about an example of a practice that you might do when you're holding a community gathering around grief in nature, or what might that look like, either if people happen to live in your area, which I'm going to share all of your links in the show notes. I'm always like, darn, why don't I live in Pennsylvania?
Oh,
Um,
and I'm
every time I
always like,
see you
why
have
don't
an
I live
amazing,
in Southern
well,
California?
also come to Southern California. I feel like we're brewing up some kind of collab happening here right now as we're speaking. But whether they can come join you in person or this is something they might want to create in their own ways, what what might we learn from what you're doing in terms of, a land, a ritual, a nature, a ceremony around grief? Is there one that comes to mind that has felt really moving or surprising or meaningful that you've held? We'll be right back with more of this beautiful conversation. My hope is that this show feels like a safe space to be inside your grief. Remember, you don't need to do this alone. Your grief is valid and a normal response to loss. And the truth is, we live in a grief illiterate culture, which makes navigating this process more challenging than it needs to be. As a narrative therapy trained social worker and student of grief education and ritual, I'm here to walk alongside you. I'll offer you a place to feel seen and held and help you discover skills and practices for being with both grief and joy. Let me be your guide. If you're interested in learning more about individual grief support with me, you can visit lisakeefauver.com after the show today. That's Lisa, Keefauver.com.
I think, and this has been honestly a surprise to me too, are the grief walks that I do with the Philly Goat Project, which I tend to talk about a lot just because I'm always in such awe and gratitude of how much people get out of that space. But the Philly Goat Project is a nonprofit here, and they use goats. They have a herd of 13 goats that they use in wellness and therapeutic engagement with the community. And the goats are housed on the grounds of a beautiful arboretum. So the grief walk takes place on these grounds. And as we're walking, as I'm leading this walk, which I do once a season, so there's usually a different theme
Yeah.
as we walk, I will tell people to try to cultivate silence as they walk and to just notice what catches their eye. Is it the color of a certain flower? Is it this bird that just hovered on a branch? Is it a particular stone? Is it the sound of the water? And just be curious about what
Ugh.
those things might be saying to their grief in that moment, might be saying to them about how they can take better care of themselves or tend their grief. There's a pond on the property that we often stop at, which I think is a wonderful invitation to sort of reflect on how accessible do your internal waters feel to you? Do you have a
Uh,
lot of access to your tears right now, or are tears really hard for you? What might it be like to actually ask the water to help you flow a little more freely with your
mm,
tears? Or maybe you're like really feeling rageful and angry and you want a little more softness. Can you ask the water to help you with that? So, just these really simple invitations that I throw out just to help people think about nature in a different way, but also to remind them that they are so supported. I think one of the hardest things for us in grief is, all the people we thought would be there who drift away and disappear,
yeah,
and we feel so alone. And I'm not saying that anything replaces the warmth and care of human
yeah,
connection. But when I remember that I have this whole wider web of life that is also supporting me and speaking to me and offering its medicine, then I feel so much less alone and more resourced.
yeah. I love that language or idea of nature as medicine there, and nature as community,
Yeah.
is kind of what I hear you saying, and, the tree people and the plant people and the even the pond people, right? It's just to think about
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, to think about that,
yeah,
and I hear you saying that these aren't, you know, complex instructions. These aren't, asking you to have a significant, meditation practice. These are, um, prompts that allow people to connect back to their knowing or to their remembering too, maybe. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the most moving things, I mean, I feel like our work puts us in proximity to moving things all
Yes.
the time. But
Yes.
one of
How
the,
lucky are we?
yes,
Yeah.
one of the things that was so deeply touching to me was when I co facilitated a grief retreat last year. And one of my invitations was to have people go and speak their grief to anything that happened to be in our
Yeah.
surroundings in nature, and just listen, just speak and listen. And this one man had such a profound experience of being held by his partner who had died when he put his arms around this tree. And it was something he hadn't felt in all of the years that his partner had died. And I was just like, oh, that, like,
So
sometimes
beautiful.
I'm like, we don't have to really do much, but just say,
Yeah.
"Here, go out into this wide world and just notice and pay attention."
Yeah. Pay attention. I feel like Mary Oliver, speaking of poets,
I
that's what
yes,
she
I
said.
heard that as I was
Right?
saying
That's
that.
as you're saying
Yes,
as
yeah.
life's instruction, like, pay attention, be
Yeah.
amazed, or yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I think what you just named there is so important as a reminder to all of us, whether you're listening as a griever, as a grief supporter, both, because most of us are both, is how little it does take. There aren't the big words, there aren't the complicated assurances. Our job is not to fix, our job is just to contain, and I think in some ways, nature is such a good teacher and a community and a beautiful source of grief support because nature doesn't have an ego. Nature doesn't have an agenda about trying to fix our grief. It just knows how to like witness and hold it. And so, even in that, I think we can learn from the wisdom of
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And nature is also wild and messy and unpredictable sometimes. And so
Yes.
even that is permission to be in the
Yeah.
fullness of our grief.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think screaming in nature, wailing in nature, being soothed by nature, is possible because we watch nature do all of those things. You
Yeah.
know, it
Yeah.
floods and it fires and it hibernates and it blossoms and it dies and it comes back. And um, should we lose track of that, which it's easy to do in the depths of our grief, especially in early grief? This is where I keep coming back to why nature is such an important um, everything teacher,
Yes.
container,
Yeah.
guide. Yeah. Because it's a
Yeah.
mirror to what we forget in, again, back to where we started today, sort of in our culture, which might be our family culture, it might be our country culture, it might be our media, the systems that we inhabit, um, try to convince us that there's something neat and orderly to achieve and an outcome to get to in our grief. And that's why I like poetry too. Anything, and
Yeah.
play, creativity is a reminder that there's beauty in the mess and that the mess is a part of it. It's not a byproduct. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Oh,
Creativity is so important too. I love that you just named that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been a poet, as you said. What do you know to be true about the role of creativity in our ability or capacity to center aliveness, to be with our grief, to be with wonder? What's maybe surprised you about creativity, or what might you want our audience to know about
Mhm.
the role of creativity?
Yeah. I mean, creativity can be such a surprising channel. Like you sit down, and I can say, I consider myself a writer. I'm not someone who does a lot with visual art. So whenever somebody gives me some kind of visual art project to do, I'm always kind of like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
um, but, I have a friend who does just an hour of tending to your grief with art, like bring finger paints, bring markers, crayons, whatever. And she'll just give you like a little prompt and off you go to do whatever. And it's always amazing to me what
Yeah.
happens, what emerges, what I'm like, oh, I didn't know I was feeling this way, or I didn't know this connected to that. So I think there's something very freeing about creativity because it drops us out of our thinking mind. Well,
Yes.
I should say for myself, if I can
Yes.
get past the, oh my God, I'm going to really
If we can
suck
get
at this
past the
and mess up.
ego
Yeah.
if we can get past the ego, creativity and play drops us out of our thinking mind and into our embodied selves. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And
Sometimes
that's
the
where,
journey to get there is hard. We have a
yes,
lot of
it is.
training and
It is.
expertise and ego, and yeah,
And my
yeah.
seventh grade teacher who told me I was not
Yes.
good at art. So, um,
Rude. Yeah.
he's so
Yeah.
rude.
Yeah.
Uh, but, but yeah, exactly what you said. It's an embodied experience, and so much wisdom lives in our body. So, creativity can give us access to that in ways that some other practices can't.
Yeah. I love well, it's also, I mean, another way it mirrors nature. It's wild and it's messy and it's unpredictable. And I feel sometimes that that kind of container, especially if you're trying a kind of creative outlet that isn't your usual, that you don't have some skills at, um, allows you to drop out of ego or what you think you should be feeling, or the things that feel familiar, that you know how to feel, that are familiar, and can allow you to tap into a thought, a memory, an emotion that
Yeah.
you didn't have access to in those other forms.
Absolutely. I mean, when I teach my class writing the broken heart, which is all poetry and writing, and I read a poem that pertains to loss or some aspect of being human, and then I give a prompt based on that poem. And it's amazing what people discover, the,
Yeah.
awarenesses that come through, the things they haven't looked at that come through, the different perspectives. Like it's just so powerful to me what having some creative outlet can offer us. And I think for the very grief averse, maybe sometimes they think like the only way to get through this is like to just go sit and like purge everything on a therapist's
Yeah.
couch, or, like they just
Yes.
think it has
Yeah.
to be intense and hard and a struggle and painful. And it's like, put on some
No.
music and dance, grab some paints, sit
Yeah.
with your journal, like whatever it is. It doesn't have to always
Take a
be
walk in
this.
nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that so much. And to me, the other thing you said about the man hugging the tree, and I'm connecting this back to the creativity, is the way that nature, creativity, play resources us in ways that are just as meaningful and differently resourcing than talking to someone. Because, of course, I believe that there's a power in being held and seen and witnessed by a human. And we all need different ways of being resourced at different times in our grief with different experiences. And so, sort of thinking about having a broader palette to, access your resource feels so meaningful. So I love that you brought that in. Lately, I've been playing with watercolor as a way to get at my sorrow and, weirdly, my rage, which is an interesting thing to think about, watercolor and rage, but I've been
Yeah.
really working towards that. I've also been doing like online design stuff, like designing stickers as a way to transform my rage. But um, I so appreciate this topic of allowing our emotions to be seen, held, witnessed, and to move through us. And it feels like a kind of a full circle to the beginning of our
Mm.
conversation around, maybe you not having modeled for you, like so many of us didn't. How do we express and move with our emotions? And that your journey to learning that centering aliveness, meaning paying attention to the delight of the tree, the nature, the painting, the poem, is what allows you to pay attention to the rage and the disappointment and the sorrow and the longing of the relationship that wasn't. And that it's not about moving from one to the other and ta-da. It's about,
Yeah.
yeah, as we close, is there a visual that comes to mind or a practice that comes to mind for those of us who get to a place where we think people will move through something in a big way. They'll move through a particular aspect of their grief or finally get in touch with a particular emotion. And then they'll sort of think of themselves as having arrived there. And I'm using air quotes if you're not watching us on YouTube, right? Like, I've arrived there. I've arrived to a good place. Maybe they don't use the word over it, but they're sort of arrived there. And then the anger resurfaces or a new emotion comes up and they use the word stuck. I'm either
Hmm.
stuck or I've fallen back. Like I thought I was making progress, but now I realize, there's this sort of language which presumes a kind of linearness, right? Like, I
Yeah.
was doing so good, I've arrived there, and now I'm pissed off again and replaying that conversation. When really life is, I don't know, Pigpen's dust cloud is maybe a better visual representation versus a linear, right, line. So how do
Yes.
you, for
Oh my
yourself or when
gosh.
you're
Yes.
working with people, how do you help people see the the beauty or the truth in our fluidness, in I don't want to use it two steps forward, one step back, 10 steps forward, 12 steps back, or side to side? How do
Yeah.
you help people see, either through nature, through ritual, through land, through poetry, the truth, beauty, okayness, I don't even know what the word is, of that vacillating back and forth?
Yeah. Well, gosh, there's like so many different thoughts bouncing around
Yes,
in my
please. We have
head right
time. I know.
now.
Yeah. I gave you a lot. I gave you a
um,
lot there.
One of the first things that came to mind, or maybe it was really the ocean calling on me in
Yes.
this moment, but because we started there
Uh,
too, was to think of the ocean and, the ebb and flow and the tides and there are waves, and
Yeah.
some days they're super tranquil, and other days those waves will knock you down. And you can't tame the ocean. It's not like if you have
Yeah.
one day of placid waters, that means that that's
Yeah.
it. It's never going to get stormy or rough seas again. And so I
Yeah.
think working with water in that way can be a good
Yeah.
a good sort of metaphor for grief's fluidity. But the other thing that came to me is, I'm part of a collective that I co-founded called Salt Trails, and we do something called singing our grief, which is
Yeah.
exactly what it is. We gather to sing our grief
Yeah.
once a month, and there's always sort of an arc where we start off with just kind of grounding people, helping them arrive in this space, become a little more present to what's there for them. And then there's an opportunity through singing to we actually sing a song called Loosen to begin to like loosen up and like
Yeah.
let what's working through you have some movement in your voice. And then the songs eventually lead to a moment of being able to, as much as you're able to go to that depth, tap into your grief, to give it
Yeah.
sound, to really vocalize it or to speak it. And so sometimes there are people sobbing, sometimes people wailing. We don't have any set way for it to look. It's just whatever
Yeah.
wants to happen in that moment. And then we gently bring them to sort of a softer landing place after they've had that. And then we move to a song that tends to be more lighthearted. And I always say, this is not necessarily to steer you toward joy. We're
Yeah.
not moving toward resolution here, because just because you've come and you've tended your grief tonight and you've given it
Yeah.
some space
We have
doesn't
to.
mean you're like good. Like this
Yeah.
is, yeah.
Wrapped it up in a
we,
little bow. Ta-da.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like repetition matters. We have to keep
Yeah.
coming back to tending. But this is really to create some more spaciousness in
Yeah.
you to be with what it is you're carrying and what it is you're working with. And sometimes I wonder when people get stuck or, whatever happens because they think, oh, I'm done, I'm good.
Yeah.
It's because they lose that practice of repetition. It's like they have a good moment and
Yeah.
then they think everything's all squared away. And so they stop being curious about their grief. They stop checking in with their body. They stop wondering,
Mm.
like what's really alive or present for me in this moment. And then all of a sudden the grief comes and it's like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I thought I was done
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love this idea. First of all, love a water metaphor. So thank you for bringing that here. I love metaphor in general and a water metaphor for sure. But I think I just want to reflect back as we close this concept that you just brought up, which is so important, which is this repetition, is learning to sort of, and Dr. Joe Cacciatore talks about this too, is like building the musculature. It's like, how do we build the musculature or repeat our tending practices, our tending to our grief, our tending to our joy, our tending to the messiness and the beauty of it, so that we aren't, doesn't mean you won't be knocked down in a wave, but you will be reminded that remembering that you have the musculature to stand back up, to turn your gaze towards something beautiful, to offer yourself compassion for the fact that the wave knocked you down. And that's what that sort of repetition or that tending practice allows you to have a little more um, confidence in your capacity to move with whatever is showing up at your door. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, so
Yeah.
beautifully said. I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know, listeners, we could make this 2 hours, so maybe we'll have a part 2, but for now, I wanna say, Nyla, thank you so much for bringing your warmth, your wisdom, your tender-heartedness, your aliveness to the conversation today. I'm so deeply grateful to know you and to be in conversation with you.
Oh my gosh, I could talk to you for hours. This was
Yeah.
such a nourishing conversation. Thank you so much, Lisa. It's been a pure
Thanks,
joy.
Nyla. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, we will see you next time on Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. Well, my friends, I hope you learned as much as I did in this episode. Didn't I tell you, Nyla is such a special human being? I so appreciate her invitation for us to remember that grief is our human inheritance and that nature, creativity, community, they're containers. They're the containers we need to be present to our aliveness. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I hope you learned something new. Maybe you felt seen or acknowledged in your grief, or maybe just feel more equipped to show up for someone grieving the death of their loved one. If you loved this episode, we'd so appreciate it if you took just a few minutes to head to the Grief is a Sneaky Bitch show page on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review about what the show meant to you. Okay, my friends, until next time, I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding you in my heart.